behind the enemy. Heavy firepower. How was a gun planted at this spot? How did these men reach behind the enemy lines to strike at this vital enemy point? This gun, these men, came from the sky, and they came by one of several methods. Perhaps they came as paratroopers, men hardened and trained for this special task, taught to jump and land and fight with many kinds of weapons. But their sharp vertical attack would often be scattered and lost over miles of enemy landscape. But perhaps they came in heavy planes, as troops who need not be specially trained, who could be moved in giant transports, landed together in a single spot. But that spot had to be a runway, a cleared level field, a length of concrete road, or the invasion from the sky would remain in the sky, undelivered. So to these two weapons, parachute and transport, another weapon is being added. The heavy glider, the CG-4A, mobile as the parachute, big as the transport, able to land in defiance of wind velocity and wind direction, able to come down into rough country, into a pasture or the edge of a forest behind the enemy's position. Invasion from the sky, delivered by a weapon of deadly precision. And the man who aims this weapon is the glider pilot. The success or failure of this powerful weapon depends on the training of this man, the glider pilot. Let's listen to one of them.
Glider pilot? Well, that's what I thought. Sure, I'd been wearing a nice silver G with wings, but when I began my tactical training, I found out how much I really had to learn. But I mean a hell of a lot. First day down here, I walked out to have a look at the line. Piles of tow ropes, all the vehicles, just what you'd find on any operations line. Parachute truck, the boys repairing shroud lines, radio truck, the old meat wagon. The runway was pretty empty. The other boys were up flying. There was a truck heading out, rope truck with its big reels. I thumbed a ride with the Jeep and followed them just to watch and see what I could learn. Then we saw the 47s overhead, coming back to the field. They were dropping tow ropes. Now there's one, look at that. 350 feet of pure nylon. Make a lot of stockings for that gal in St. Louis. However, the men out here were collecting them for quite a different reason. The day's work was on full blast. Ground crews busy as a pack of bird dogs. C-47s roaring overhead. Sky full of falling ropes. Each release was tabbed by the men watching the planes from the radio truck. They signaled the tow plane, rope free and clear. The pilots in those tugs were doing a little precision bombing. They drop 100 yards of rope over and over again within a small area. Still, it was a good idea to keep one eye open. After all, there's a steel plug at either end. When the reels were full, I came back with the truck. I wanted to watch every detail. I wanted to see the ropes laid out for inspection. The way I feel about it, that rope is my engine. I want to make damn sure it doesn't fail. I noticed that while one man inspected the ropes, his pal concentrated on the plugs. He'd test them to see that they fit and held and released. That rope will have to take a heavy strain, so it's worthwhile to have every inch inspected after a flight for any sign of injury or fraying. There. Hey, what about that? A bad one? It sure is. No glider gets hooked behind this one. Men's lives would depend on that rope. I learned they were getting ready for a full afternoon's work. After lunch that day, there was a powwow around the operations table on the line. I listened in. There was to be a demonstration takeoff. We were to watch every detail. That's the tug signal man standing way out in front. The tug's in position now. The glider pilot finished his checklist, tested his controls, and after the plug-in, he tests the security of the plug, then gets set as the 47 is hooked up. Its engines are turning over at 15 inches. At the left of the glider is the glider signal man giving the okay to the tug man, who motions the tug slowly forward. The rope is tight. The glider moves. Something wrong? The signal man stops the takeoff on signal from the glider pilot. The tug signal man relays the signal. Tug and glider come to a stop. What's wrong? Faulty brakes, maybe. No, it's okay now. The high ball's been given again. The tugman repeats the signal. Tug and glider move slowly down the runway. Once again, the rope tightens, gives a little, pulls taut again. The tow accelerates rapidly. The glider pilot keeps directly behind the tug. Soon he has enough speed to lift into high tow position. This position behind the 47, as well as most other planes, will keep the glider well above the prop wash. And he will keep that position until the tug is well off the ground. Then when the prop wash is not batted back by the runway, he can come a little lower. Well, takeoffs and tow position are pretty mechanical. But landings, now that's something else again. From the moment you've reached up and squeezed your release, you're on your own. You start earning that silver G. Now here's a landing to watch. See him lose speed along the base leg, maintaining straight flight all the way until he can make his 90-degree turn. All landing patterns will end this way, and it's the end that counts. Now watch him. He's beginning his approach leg. Once again, he keeps a straight course with reference to the ground. He's keeping a normal glide throughout, trying for the greatest possible distance over the ground for the altitude sacrificed. To get this in the CG-4A, he keeps his flying speed as low as possible, consistent with safety. And he keeps his speed constant. His glide path is a straight line. He aims with his glide. Yes, I'd admit that was a pretty good landing for an instructor, except that tail dropped pretty hard. That was bad. Well, proves he's human. Now here's a portrait of a pilot with a bad hangover. I know. Oh, that was me, brother. After that one, I began to analyze every landing I could see. This one's coming in too low, stretching his glide, hurtling, diving. His glide angle was shifting all the time. Not so hot, I'd say. This Joe leveled off too soon. Watch him. He's hit his tail long before he was ready to land. He still had too much flying speed. And this one, coming out of a slip, still too high. He dives. Hits pretty hard. Sure thought that gear was going to give. He stopped fast, but not at the right spot. Sure, slips are valuable, but you have to know how. This guy thinks he's in a good slip, but he isn't sure. He just hasn't got that old control, so his glide path is bound to be inaccurate. Now there he goes, shutters in sideways. Now here's a good slip. By the way, I happen to be piloting that glider. Just the brakes, you know. Moderate slip, good recovery, maintain normal glide and normal landing. Well, I was learning, you have to admit that. Watch that straight ground course. Good end to a normal glide. Of course, there are other ways of making the angle of that glide steeper. Here it's done by breaking out a tail parachute. The extra drag is quite an effect. When released, you shoot ahead again. You can see how the angle flattens out. Of course, one of the best ways of losing speed is on the ground. Emergency stop technique. Apply brakes, nose goes down, nose gets contact, and brother, you stop. One Saturday morning, 3 of us got together and put on a show. Jack Pearson on the left there had jettison gear. Bob in the middle had skids only, and I was using training gear. We wanted to test how short we could stop. This was me. Brakes and training gear. I stopped on a dime. I looked out to see where Bob was. He'd skidded about 30 feet further. But where in the devil was Pearson? Oh, there he was on his jettison wheels. No brakes, and he's probably still rolling. And yet that's not bad in comparison. Here's the old-fashioned method of landing gliders. Notice those diving turns, gathering speed instead of losing speed? Now, that was our old style. Blitz landings, we called them, and they blitzed right along at high speed, eating up the airport like a B-29. This is probably a wonderful technique if you're briefed to land in Texas. But just imagine landing that way in this pleasant little spot. One thing sure, you just can't blitz in here. You've got to have control, control, and control. The weeks were going by. We were getting confidence in ourselves, in the CG-4A. So one day, after explaining why we use skids and not wheels to land on a plowed field, we were asked for volunteers to put on 3 or 4 demonstration landings. For instance, one of the boys went up toward the lake, low tow position, and came in low to drop his wheels. You can leave them on the runway, but this is okay too. They'll float. Then with skids alone, using normal glide again, he landed with the same technique as on wheels. Next, I went up myself, and coming in over the same lake, went in for landing on water. I knew the boys were watching me from the shore. I was a little nervous. Sure, I was going to overshoot, so I took a dive, and then, yeah, I got my feet wet. But I wasn't hurt. Darn thing will float for at least 24 hours. While the bird dogs went out to get the glider, I went back for dry clothes. I had permission to try again. I recovered from left slip, went directly into a normal glide. I tried to keep an even, smooth, constant angle of descent. Tried to forget I was landing on a lake. Tried to imagine it was a field of 4-leaf clover. I hit water in a 3-point landing. Perfect. Then I realized something very important. That the landing itself is not a special maneuver, but merely the end of a normal glide. Very next day, we began practice in double tow. I found it takes a fair amount of precision and control. The right-hand glider is towed 75 feet behind the left glider. Both pilots have the responsibility to maintain a safe spacing between wingtips and never allow themselves to overlap, as these gliders are doing. A slight error might be easily corrected in single tow. In double tow, it becomes dangerous. Here, the 2 gliders are too far apart on tow. Sloppy flying adds unnecessary drag to the tow ship. This shows how close together the 2 are after release. Just formation flying without benefit of throttles. When 2 gliders are that close, each must know what the other is going to do. Erratic approaches are out. Normal glides are the only safe procedure. After my turn, I watch the other boys. Here are 2 gliders off a double tow. Shows their proximity in landing. First one lands smoothly, the other dives to contact the ground, stops far shorter than necessary. First glider, meanwhile, is rolled forward and stopped at the designated place. The idea, you see, is not only to land safely, but to land at an exact spot. Can you make your glider deliver men and guns to a pinpoint on a map? Deliver punches with precision to the enemy's rear and flank? You'll need plenty of this kind of work before you can answer with confidence. Yes, I can. You'll need plenty of practice learning to follow and trail while you're in the air, to adjust for the man landing in front of you, to disperse in close order, and not out in the middle of a field, because this line of trees someday will be the screening cover at the end of an enemy field. Day after day, we're coming closer to actual combat problems. From landing to a line of trees, we learn to land and disperse within a marked circle, 600 feet in diameter, landing like the spokes of a wheel, each plane in a designated spot. Yes, in spite of the array of gliders already parked in front of you, in spite of any surprise in wind direction on ground conditions, you learn to come down with full control, as briefed. We were up very often now practicing formations. Elements of 2, right echelon, right hand tug abreast of left hand glider. And we were slowly acquiring air discipline, which is something you get when you realize at last that you're nobody unless you're part of a group with a definite job to do. And all your training is directed toward that job. Now we could see the reason behind the different patterns of approach as they were summarized for us on the blackboard.
All right. Now here's what we call the 90-degree side approach. Here's the field with barriers here and here. This is the wind direction. The formation approaches at right angles to the wind, releases here, and the gliders follow straight on for their base leg, making a 90-degree turn and make their final approach upwind. A 180 side approach is adding one leg to the 90. Here's the field, the barriers, the wind direction. The formation approaches downwind, releases here. The gliders make a 90-degree turn, execute the base leg, make another 90-degree turn, and land. The 270 side approach, most useful for night work. Setup is just the same, but this time the formation comes in at right angles to the wind, releases here, and immediately the gliders make a 90-degree turn. From this point on, the approach is identical with the 180 side approach. But in the 135 side approach, the formation comes in at this angle, releases here, then makes a 45-degree turn into the base leg, then the usual 90-degree turn and final approach. Now for the overhead approaches, so called because they come in over the field instead of at the side. In the 180 overhead, the formation approaches downwind, and at this point, the gliders execute a 45-degree right turn, a 135-degree left turn, and so on as before. The 270 overhead comes over the field at right angles to the wind, releases here. After that, it's the same as the 180 overhead. The 135-degree turn here, base leg, final turn, and landing. And finally, the 360 overhead, in which the formation approaches directly upwind and releases here. The gliders make fairly sharp 135-degree turns immediately after release, glide to this point, and make another 135-degree turn, quite sharp again, into the base leg. After the final 90-degree turn, they are gliding in for a landing in a direction nearly identical with the original direction of the formation.
With these basic patterns in our mind, plus plenty of practice, we were anxious to get into really advanced work. We heard a lot about an air maneuver they call a rat race. Okay, now we were ready to try it. We pulled out rapidly in mass formation. One takeoff every 25 seconds. We used not only 47s, but a few 60s we'd borrowed from another field. I was last man in formation, Bob Edwards taking off in front of me. Now my tug swung into place, ready to take on out. While it was being hooked up, I was testing controls, making absolutely sure, testing the security of my own plug. We were all determined this time to make every detail technically perfect. Proper. We use elements of 3 and right echelon moving in at 3,000. As soon as released, I would turn into the spiral trail of gliders forming the rat race, like a Lufberry circle. This really tests air discipline, normal glide, precise interval from next glider, and finally, accurate judgment in leaving the spiral for the old precision approach and restricted landing. And boy, I mean restricted. Look at that. Bob, trying to stretch his glide, stalled out high and cracked up. I kept full control. Now it was my turn. I was aiming for the narrow spot I was instructed to fill, between two gliders already in place. That was going to be plenty of fun. There was my spot. I was rolling into it, right up to Maggie's drawers. There were wings and tails on both sides of me. I could almost reach out and touch him. Boy, I was home. Early one morning in the last week of our training, a medium bomber landed on our field with 4 stars painted on its fuselage. Yes, this was it. This was the day. General Hap Arnold had come to witness our final graduation maneuvers. There wasn't much he missed. Troops of the Airborne battalions marched to our glider field, wearing full combat equipment. The tugs were lined up, serviced, and ready. Troops and their heavy weapons began to disappear into the waiting gliders. Just how is a Jeep put aboard? What kind of knot will keep it secure in flight? And how many? And how much? And how long? In this war of new tactics and new weapons, the glider is one of the newest, the least developed. That's why every detail, maximum capacity, methods of loading, are questions of deadly importance. Questions that could be settled only in the sweat of actual practice. Yes, this is the day we and the gliders must show our stuff. The glider carrying this gun and the glider carrying the towing jeep will take off close behind one another, briefed to land side by side. Under the eyes of the commanding general of the Air Forces, every available glider takes to the air, loaded with armed men and ready weapons. As the general watches, he is thinking of the future, of full-scale invasion by air, of gliders taking off for the flat fields of Holland, or the rice paddies of the Philippines, or night assaults on the suburbs of Hamburg and Yokohama. Yes, we're being trained for a job, for a purpose, and this mass formation takeoff some early morning will be the real thing. Because we glider pilots know our ships can carry the tools of assault and deliver them to a point where they're least expected and most demoralizing to the enemy. Behind the last 47, a glider takes off, briefed for a skid landing. It leaves its jettison gear on the runway. And now the general gets a surprise. That's his own B-25 towing a glider today, and that glider is already in the air. The B-25 will take off with extreme acceleration, climb steeply. Another ship rolls past. The plane the Germans call the Fork-tailed Devil, a fighter, and a fighter bomber, and a tow ship too. The glider remains low before takeoff. The P-38 needs all its elevator control to get itself in the air. And what is this? Yeah, you're right. It's a PBY, affectionately known as the Duck. It's a Navy job. Yes, the Navy is here too, pulling gliders. Because the tow rope is attached by means of a yoke from the center of gravity, the glider flies low tow position and hugs the runway till after the plane is taken off. Now a fortress. Under its powerful acceleration, both gliders are already airborne. 2 engines to a glider. Pulling double is no stunt for a B-17. But here is a triple tow behind a C-54. Easy for this great transport, but not so easy for the glider pilot. The middle glider, fighting prop wash all the way, is forced to rise sharply. While unusual these days, triple tow may soon be routine. All we need is more 54s. By this time, most of us in the single tows have come into formation. We're flying toward the maneuver area. In the mind of every one of us, in our hands, in our feet, in our insides, we've got concentrated all the details we've learned through these last weeks. We're ready to test ourselves now. In this area of small fields, rough pastures, and groves of yellow pine, the formation will spring its surprise assault. You'll probably see every type and technique of landing. Good and bad pilots, good and bad judgment, good and bad landings. Watch them closely, critically. Someday, one of them will be you. We've brought this cargo safely to the ground, brought men and guns to a precisely designated spot. The first half of this job is damn well done. But that's not all. The big half is yet to come. To go into action with these men and these guns. To go forward, to attack. Because we're not just pilots. We're fighting pilots. Glider pilots.